Welcome and good morning to this Reshape Travel Fireside Chat. We don't have a fireplace really here, but we feel the warmth because I'm in really good company. I'm Geert de Bo, Vice President of Global Business Travel at JTB Business Travel. I'm joined here this morning by Wade Jones, Executive Vice President and Chief Product Officer for Sabre Travel Solutions. Welcome, Wade. And we're joined virtually by Rob Lebel, Managing Director, Specialty for Canada, Mexico, and Mid-Market Sales for Delta. Good morning, welcome, Rob. And I'm also joined here this morning by Scott Morgan, Global Account Director, Global Sales at the Intercontinental Hotels Group, IHG. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
Really great having you. Sort of a hybrid. We're in person with Wade. It's really good to be in an office again, meeting in person. We've all missed that. Just a quick question to sort of get us going. Are you fully back in the office again? Where is Sabre at the moment?
Yeah, so we have what I would call a hybrid approach. We call it a global work from anywhere method of coming back to the office. And we've let our colleagues actually self-identify on how they want to work. Do they want to be in the office, which requires at least 3 days a week, and you get a desk and a location? Do you want to be completely remote, or do you want a hybrid? And if you have a hybrid, you get hot desking basically out there. And so we are fully back in that realm. I think that, it's a mixed bag on how many people are coming back and still have the challenges of virtually. How do you really connect? And so I think we're going to see changes over time.
Yeah. Great, and I'm sure it may be similar for Delta and IHG. Rob, just for you, it seems like you're back in an office. Do you see changes like with hybrid model, and has it changes for you personally, maybe in terms of traveling to the office or traveling somewhere else?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question, and first off, thank you for having us at Delta as a trusted partner of JTB be part of this panel. We're very much appreciative of being able to give our viewpoints today. So thank you for having us. And yeah, similar to Wade's answer there at Delta, we have fully reopened back up the office. We actually did that back last summer, as far back as June. And then of course the Omicron variant hit, and then we hit the pause button and folks went back home. But long story short, the office is 100% open here in Atlanta, and the parking lot's full, which is a great thing to see. And the collaboration effort is back. There's nothing like being face-to-face together, which I'm sure we would all agree in the travel space. But that being said, similar to Wade's comments, we are giving some certain flexibility as well too. Fridays, for example, pretty much all of us are home on Fridays, and then Monday through Thursday, it's a bit of a hybrid approach there as well too. If individuals want to come in all 4 of those days, they can certainly more than welcome to come down. If they work out a deal with their respective manager and they choose to work a little bit virtually, that's okay too. But it's been very, very encouraging from a leadership perspective just to see so many folks coming back, and we see that as a bright shining star as well too, to help set the precedent for the industry, because we do see this direct correlation with return to office with return to travel. We see it with all of our large corporate accounts certainly as well too. So we're trying to set that walk the walk, talk the talk, so to speak, as far as us coming back into the office, and we hope our corporate accounts do the same, so that then in turn folks get back to traveling again as well too.
Yeah, great segue into you, Scott. How's that for you? Back in the office, does it mean back in travel too? Being in hospitality, are you traveling again?
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me, and thanks for the amazing partnership with JTB. It's great to be on the panel, and although I'm not there in person, I think the hybrid approach is certainly going to continue. But we are back in the office. It's flexible, very similar to Rob's comments. In our Americas headquarters in Atlanta, we certainly have a hybrid approach. So we're finding more and more now that teams are coming together, a couple days a week still, and having those in-person meetings or those town halls. So we see that continuing, but we've been very flexible. And I really think that for IHG, that is, the direction will continue to move. And we've been able to do so much virtually in the last 2 years, and quite honestly, things that we didn't even think we were going to be able to accomplish, we were very successful at. So we'll continue to promote coming to the office. If you'd like to come in, and if there's meetings taking place, obviously on the hotel level, it's a bit different. We need to have certain staff at the hotel level. So that will continue, of course. And then based on our regional offices, still, some have a hybrid, some are more in office than others. But yeah, it's great to be able to come in and actually see your colleagues face to face.
Wonderful. Wade, I think we're all sensing a really positive trend here that things go back to some normalcy, maybe a little different than it used to be. Sabre has, I assume, a lot of insight into sort of travel trends. And what are you seeing? Are we seeing that recovery is really happening?
Yeah, look, I think the great thing about travel is that it's an incredibly resilient market and people want to travel. I think we've sometimes been surprised at the pent-up demand given the recovery trends at previous elements that have sort of shook the travel industry. We, of course, saw recovery last year, and then the Omicron variant hit, Delta variant hit, and they would dip back down. It started to recover again in January, and we continue to see steady progression and improvements. And so I'm hopeful that the world is sort of going from pandemic to endemic and saying, we would get back to travel. We do see at the moment a lengthening of the travel stays, that they've gone from sort of average 8 to 9 days to 10 to 11 days. But we think that that's more about the mix of the type of traveler than it is a shift in actual structural behavior, because there's more leisure travel at the moment. Corporate travel tends to be about a 5-day stay as an average. And so we think that's really the primary driver, because lodging stays have stuck around 3.5 days. But we're encouraged. Our hotel bookings are the fastest to recover. They're almost at 80% of 2019 levels. Airline passengers boarded approaching 70%. The GDS, and we're heavily indexed to corporate travel, north of 30%. But we're seeing a lengthening of forward-looking bookings further out. So we're encouraged that means that travel is coming back and here to stay, hopefully. But great news that people want to get back to travel, and I think that's true from a leisure perspective as well as corporately. We like to connect with human beings, and so we need to be in a room together, despite the fact that we're going to work in a hybrid environment.
Absolutely, and this testifies to how great it is really to be together. Do you see regional differences like North America, Europe, Asia Pacific? Are there different paces of how you see travel coming back?
For sure. So North America has had a much stronger recovery, followed by Latin America, then EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa, followed by APAC as the lagging region of the world for us. And so, that impacts mix of travel. I think a lot of that has to do with, the borders and opening up and what that's going to mean for international travel. We're still not seeing the same amount of long haul travel. We absolutely want to see that come back. But again, I think there's great pent up demand. I happened to be at Delta last week, Rob, with some of your colleagues, and they were talking about what you guys are seeing from a international demand perspective and the health of what we hope is going to be a positive year.
That's great. Yeah.
And if I could, I'll chime in. Everything Wade said is spot on. The exact same trending that we're seeing at Delta in our advanced bookings, domestic leading the way, Latin America behind it, Europe picking up steam, and then APAC, unfortunately, about 40, coming up on maybe 50% recovered for Asia. The others, though, domestic leisure, especially, fully over 100% recovered, going back to 2019. And then quickly, I'll comment too on a good point Wade hit there as far as the booking windows have changed a lot. You touched on the leisure. The leisures typically book very far out. Well, now they're waiting and closer to the departure. And yet the corporate we see booking further out. So there's almost this convergence of booking windows between leisure and corporate that we really haven't experienced in the past. And it makes it really, really difficult for our revenue management team just to be able to manage through the different channels as we move forward.
That's interesting. So you're saying that leisure booking shorter, closer to the actual trip, but you see the opposite trend a little bit in corporate travel?
Exactly. Not holistically, certainly not all corporate, but some corporate we do see looking farther out, like, okay, maybe the headquarter office is open, I'm going to plan a trip. Instead of planning that week of departure, maybe I'm going to do it 14, 21, 28 days out. So it's a little bit of a different booking curve dynamic that we've seen with corporate than in the past.
Do you think that also may have to do Wade with different type of travel? Because again, we were talking about hybrid in the office. We know that people that work remotely have maybe moved away to different places of the country or different places in Europe. So business travel may have shifted to more like team travel. We need to travel once a month together as a team. Do we see that?
Yeah, I don't think we can say definitively that we've seen that, but that's certainly our working hypothesis, is that corporate travel is going to be healthy, but the type of corporate travel is probably going to look different. And that, in these hybrid environments, you still have to bring people together. I have found that things like Teams and Zoom, et cetera, they're great for transactional interactions, but when you really need to think strategically or brainstorm and get in front of a whiteboard, they're not nearly as effective. And if you're 100% virtual, I think the cultural fabric of your organization starts to unravel. We need to be with people. I mean, even today, I'm sitting here with some of my colleagues, Jay Jones, who I haven't seen, I think, since the pandemic started, and to get to see them and sort of that emotional feeling of what that's about. So I do think we're going to see people come together inside of companies and those sort of quarterly meetings, maybe regional meetings. And so whether or not we meet as much face-to-face with our customers, I don't know. But I think that's going to be hard to resist too. I think we need to be with one another to really understand each other better.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see other new trends? We talked about maybe gathering for team because of creative processes, strategy. It's just different doing that in person. Not sure where it's going maybe for sales, although we do recognize once we meet again that there's nothing like, even with customers meeting face to face, looking each other in the eyes before we sign an agreement, there's something to really shaking that hand. Do you think there's other new trends in the industry that we may see emerge?
Yeah, I think the biggest one probably is acceleration into really the digital experience for travelers and for our supply side customers. Yeah, I would say that the travel industry lagged other industries before the pandemic hit, and there's a variety of reasons for why. But consumer expectation in a COVID world has just accelerated what they want to be able to do through a self-service digital experience. And we were behind as an industry, and now the whole world has leapt forward. And so we've got to accelerate through that. And so I think how we think about technology differently, modularizing technology, much more microservices type of environment. And then I think how we bring data and artificial intelligence, machine learning into those experiences to make them better. But consumer expectations are just off the charts for what they want to be able to do from a digital point of view and customer experience.
Yeah. Maybe Rob, from at Delta, you see that the experience moving through an airport has changed, right? From a lot of more touchless. I mean, nowadays even labeling your luggage has become normal to do it yourself, things like that. Do you see that that same pattern? It's been accelerating, and what will be the next step? Yeah. Will we even meet any person in the airport at some point?
Well, I think we always need to keep tabs on the human touch, and so just to answer that last comment there, now we'll definitely still have airport customer service agents there at the beck and call of the customer to help them through the check-in process and boarding and et cetera. But and on this point, the airport experience, we learned a lot from our alliance partners as well too. Kudos to their friends KLM, and I remember years ago being in Amsterdam, especially, and just self-service, checking my own bag, and your point, didn't have to talk to anybody, and off I go through security and through the gate. So at Delta, we're working fast and furious to pilot and implement that technology here in the US as well too, and some great informational sharing again among our alliance partner airlines. But agree with everything Wade's talking about here. If there's one silver lining or positive perhaps that's come out of the pandemic process, it's we are able to kind of hit that pause button and roll up our sleeves and really dig into, from a technology standpoint, what do we want that future experience to look like for the customer, and then try to accelerate it and move it up. Whereas before, maybe that's a 5-10 year process. We were able to hit the pause button a little bit and do what we can to further expedite the launch of those technologies. So I do see that becoming more and more touchless, certainly as much as possible. But then, if and when you need human interaction, that'll be there as well too.
What do you see, Scott? Because hotels have been really champions. Almost, you literally can move in and out of a hotel without talking to a representative with the mobile key and things like that. Is there anything that's still happening next for hotels?
Yeah, very similar comments and strategies from Rob and Wade here in regards to really creating a customer-centric experience, right? I mean, that's what it's all about for our hotels. We have implemented digital check-in over 3,000 of our hotels globally, and we'll continue to expand that offer through our IHE mobile app. But we've also introduced some flexible workspaces in our hotels, and that was kind of a common trend we were seeing in some of our hotels, pre the pandemic, and we've just kind of accelerated that. And we now offer, work from the hotel room type of bookings where you can literally just stay in the hotel and work. So we've really tried to craft it and think about the customer and all that we do. Some of our travelers still want that interaction, and so we want to be able to provide that. But for the ones that do want that, seamless, experience where they don't have to meet with anyone, go right to the room, we're going to offer that. So it's really about us focusing on the personalization. We've taken a look at, of course, our increased focus on safety, cleanliness, and that's a trend that we launched from our IHE Way of Clean global commitment in 2015, but then we implemented in 2020 our IHE Clean Promise for our guests, which is really just to ensure that if they're not satisfied with their room or their overall experience, it will make it right. So that will continue. We'll continue to focus on evolving, those offerings, and then really a big focus for us for the guest experience has really been focused on responsible business. We launched our Journey to Tomorrow, our 10-year social responsible commitment, and it's really about getting back to supporting the industry, the planet, and so that's been a big focus for us as well.
Great, and I'm sure this year we'll talk a lot more about sustainability and cleaner travel.
Mm-hmm.
We actually, our next Fireside Chat is all dedicated to that, so I look forward to hearing more about that. I just wanted to go back, Wade, for a second when we talk about digital and the changes we see. As a travel technology company, you really are at the forefront of changes also in that. And I know for many years the travel industry has been talking about what we say NDC, right? The new way of getting airline content to travelers in a way that's more personalized, things bundled really for you because the airlines know who you are. Where do you think we are today? What are we really going to see? Because I know it's in the industry we've been talking about it, but we're really maybe at the phase where our travelers are going to see something about it. Can you speak a little bit into that?
Yeah, I think it's still early days on NDC. We have a big commitment to that connectivity protocol, and we'll continue to invest in that area. I think what it's trying to do for consumers is really positive, which is, the only way we can really give travelers the retailing experience, the personalization that they want, is if we use new types of technology. And so whether that's NDC or other microservices, APIs, and offer and order, as the industry talks about, or using traditional levels of connectivity, I think you want that type of flexibility. Our role, we believe, is in aggregating that content, helping people shop and know what they're buying in an informed way. But one of our big aspirations has been and continues to be that how do we make sure that we ensure that our supply side customers, goods and services and brands can be represented in a consistent way across all channels. And I think that's something that we've been behind on as an industry, and NDC is a protocol that's going to help with that. So we see varying degrees of how much real personalization and real offers are coming through that system. I think that on the other side of COVID, it will be an accelerator, because I think carriers are going to say, I need to continue to unbundle my product. Hoteliers, everybody's going to want to drive more revenue and yield, sell more things through distribution pipes. And so to the extent that we can help our customers do that, and the benefit is that the consumer gets more personalization, what they want, they can buy what they need and can clearly understand it, that'll be good no matter what productivity protocol is used. NDC, I'd say that we're probably in to use an American metaphor on baseball, in like the second or third inning of a nine-inning game.
That's helpful to know. So even though you're saying the pandemic has maybe accelerated some of that technology development, at the same time, it's going to be a long process. So more evolution rather than revolution in 2022?
Yeah, I think you have to give customers across the ecosystem the flexibility to shop, book, serve the way that they want. And so, I've never thought that there would be a big bang cutover from one protocol to another, that it will be evolution, and consumers oftentimes need that type of evolution versus big disruption. And so I think different carriers, hospitality companies will be at different paces on that curve, just as consumers will be from an adoption perspective. And so our job is to make sure that we create the flexibility in order to do that, because there's no doubt going to be some carriers and segments of the population that really lean into the personalization and the digital side of things, and others that will not be the early adopters. And so how do we make sure our technology is flexible enough to do those things to meet the needs of the marketplace? But the short answer is, I don't think it's big bang. I think it's evolutionary.
Is it safe to say also that similar to the recovery, where we see that leisure travel is really sort of leading the way back into recovery? I heard you say, we're over 100% almost pre-pandemic when we look at domestic leisure travel. Do you say with those technology changes where the consumer market seems to be a little bit early adapting those things, where the corporate market is a little bit slower in the tools we use, the technologies we use, do you think that's going to stay that way, that the consumer experience sort of drives the corporate experience?
That's a great question. We've used this term as an industry for a long time that I don't particularly like, called leisure, and business and leisure. And I think though that is an outcome of the pandemic. Is we're going to see people travel differently. They're going to rope in weekend travel into their business travel. And particularly as millennials and these new employees that come up and they want to travel. And so I think that blending of leisure leading corporate, I think, is going to shift. I think it's going to have to be a great customer experience across every channel. And we're going to have to think from a corporate perspective, how do you make sure that things like duty of care don't lock your employee into a certain way of booking and shopping and managing their travel, so that because I think their behaviors are just going to be different. And I think that's going to be an employee benefit for a company to say, I can give my colleagues flexibility, but then we know that the technology is going to have to follow with that. You're going to still have to have duty of care. So how do we do that in a way that maybe is different than the way we've thought about it in the past?
Okay. Scott, just a question for you when it comes to hotels. So we see the airline industry really working through those big technology changes to have that more personalized approach, more personalized content for the travelers. If I shop for a ticket, the airline, the technology knows me and knows my preferences, so it can bundle or unbundle in a way that really fits my needs. Do we see something different in the hotel industry, really big changes in technology, or is it completely different on your side?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I think we're looking at some of our partners that can provide some of those technological advances for us. Now, if you're talking about booking through one of your TMCs and following, the online booking portal and things like that, then that's going to be obviously managed by that travel manager and that experience. But if you're booking direct through IHG or through the IHG app, absolutely. I mean, we're looking at how we can serve up offers through our IHG loyalty, and we're excited to share that we've added some enhancements to IHG rewards that will be coming out in the next month or so. So it really is all about how we can present offers that are relevant to that traveler, right? And we want to better understand their needs. And Wade brought up a good point. When you're looking at the mix between the leisure and the corporate travel, it is a blend. And it's how do you target those travelers? How do you serve up relevant content when there are some more blurred lines? So for us, we're looking at, as I mentioned earlier, enhancing the guest experience. That could be through digital or personalized experience. But at the end of the day, we want to make it customized to each traveler, which can be challenging. So not sure if I answered your question in its entirety, but we're definitely looking at how we can better position IHG, both from a B2C, B2B perspective, and really focus on, growing our brand presence, both digitally, as well as in person.
Yeah, and I think airlines, I mean, the same is for Delta, for IHG. You guys are doing a great job when it's your direct channels, right? The apps, those are very personalized. You know who's doing, but companies are looking at travel management companies, TMCs, to really help them to manage the program, and that layering between sort of still seems to make it really challenging to get that personalization in that. And of course, Sabre is right in that space where you're trying to connect those things. So you also think that both for hotel airlines, we're going to see good progress go to the third, fourth inning soon? Or?
I certainly hope so. I think travelers don't come to technology to shop or to experience and suddenly change their context and say, oh, I'm a traveler, now I have to lower my expectations, versus they're consumers. Exactly. And so we've got to deliver the right consumer experience. And then we just have to recognize that this industry is really hard technology, because you're trying to link together all of these asynchronous systems and synchronize them on perishable products, which is really different than somebody like Amazon, where everything fits in a box. And so how do you do that in a way at scale that delivers the customer experience? And there's historical technology that we're dependent on. I think there's new technology that's going to be required. I don't believe that we can deliver the customer experience by just developing in the same old ways on the same old technology. We've got to be thinking about new protocols, new ways of delivering capability in order to give the traveler what he or she deserves.
Great advocate for technology and bringing all that complexity together. We've been lived all through a 2-year disruption, basically, which has been a lot of bad and news. Is there also a silver lining to you? What are good things that actually have come out of this moving forward?
So maybe I'll share too much personal information and something that's sort of bad news, but that I found a sort of silver lining in that I think is personally and professionally. And that is, I have a firmer belief and appreciation for humanity, which seems odd in the current world and things that are going on. But in the midst of the pandemic, I actually was diagnosed with an advanced stage of cancer. And I had colleagues, family members, friends, strangers that did so much for me, and gave me this perspective of, despite what's going on in the world, despite the polarization of politics and all this other stuff, people at their core are good. And that is a great lesson.
Really, really appreciate you sharing that. And it's wonderful to hear from somebody at a technology company, right? Where we always are afraid that technology will make life very personal, but actually,
we're all people.
Absolutely. And I think we all experienced that, and it's been such a privilege to meeting you in that sense in person, right? Because there's nothing like it. So looking forward to meeting you too, Scott and Rob, in person one day. Just talking about the disruption, and then maybe Scott and Morgan, maybe let me first starting. Do you see any silver lining coming out of this pandemic for you personally, for your companies, for the travelers?
Yeah, I think we've all learned to be a little bit more nimble, right? I mean, if you think back pre-pandemic and speaking, from an IHG perspective, we thought we were moving fast. We weren't moving fast enough, and the pandemic really helped us learn how to work better globally, and virtually, of course. So the things, as I mentioned earlier, we were able to accomplish, and the rebranding of IHG and some other things, continuing to focus on our growth in distribution globally. I mean, we've opened more hotels, most recently than we have in prior years. So it's really forced us to be able to think about how we can collaborate better right? And focus on our true priorities. From a personal perspective, Wade, thanks for sharing your story. That really hit home. I think for me, having two young kids, it really forced me to be present. I think with having the young kids and previously being on the road as much, you kind of take for granted those times. And the pandemic, although it was a horrific experience, but it really allowed us to, for myself personally and my family, to kind of come together and have those times that we wouldn't have had. Most of the time I wanted to run out the door, but a lot of times, it allowed me to be appreciative of, being confined. And so, and also, then, as I mentioned, just being present. And so it's taught me, with working with colleagues that I haven't seen, is to actually listen more, right? And actually be present in those conversations, and try not to take things for granted, which can be hard to do. But I'd say that would be the silver lining through all of this for me.
Thank you for sharing it. And I totally echo. I have 3 running around at home too, so I totally hear you. Rob, how about you? Any silver lining for you for Delta?
Well, I'll make it the trifecta here and dovetail right off Scott's. So I have 2 young kids at home too, and we're both sales directors and road warriors and going 100 miles an hour with our hair on fire, no doubt, all the time before the pandemic. So yeah, it was an awesome experience just to hit that pause button, and not to say we weren't busy at work. There's still a million Zoom meetings a day, but just to be present and both mentally, physically there. And the focus on mental health as well too is a big factor that came out of the pandemic as well too. It's not anything that anyone's really comfortable talking about before. And I know at Delta, we've made a conscious effort to talk about mental health because it was such a stressful time, unprecedented pandemic. Nobody saw it coming. That had stress at home, at work, 360 around the clock, right? And so, we've gone out of our way to just have webinars with all 70,000 employees that can join, just talk about mental health, and don't be afraid to say it's okay if I'm not feeling okay. And so, things like that never were going on before the pandemic. And so to over-index on that and keep it going. So it's not like we're done and spike the ball into our touchdown dance and let's immediately snap back to the way things were. We're making a cognizant, conscious effort to adapt moving forward, to have more of that balance when it comes to mental, physical. And so, if there's the best thing of all that's come out of the pandemic, I think we're all echoing each other and saying the same thing. It's that. I think if you flip a little more to just the work learnings from it, and I mentioned before, just the expediting of projects. For Delta, for example, we have major infrastructure projects going on in our key airports like LAX, like JFK, LaGuardia. There were projects in place that weren't going to be completed at earliest until 2024, and now, as soon as within the next week or two, we're going to open up a new terminal in LA, and LaGuardia is following suit to that. Last year, we opened up Salt Lake City a year ahead of time. So that's been really positive to be able to expedite those major capital projects out there as well too. And then just a laser-like focus on the customer. So we're always focused on the customer. Obviously, all of us have to be in our respective travel businesses, but we've become such survey junkies, I'll call it, to better understand the mental psyche of the customer and what they're looking for, and the net promoter scores that have been distributed throughout the pandemic process. We've really learned from that, and what has driven those scores actually higher during that pandemic, and how do we keep that momentum going as travel returns and planes get packed and airports get packed, and obviously same thing with hotels, and how do we eliminate that traveler friction, I'll call it, as much as we can, because as we go back to 2018, 2019 type travel volumes, we've got to be cognizant as an industry not to fall victim to going back to exactly the way things were. And if we have the customers back, and how do we eliminate those stress points throughout the travel journey from them, that's what we really want to be laser-like focused on moving forward.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I appreciate your comments about the mental health, and maybe to many of us feels like, we've been through this 2 years, but things are back to normal. Then a couple of weeks ago, we are suddenly hear about a war in the Western world, something we couldn't imagine maybe happening. So it seems like, things are never back to normal or normalcy. There's always something happening, and we need to be resilient as an industry, but also personally, mentally, right? That life is always throwing curveballs at us. Do we see an impact on travel? I'm not sure if you see numbers.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we've seen impacts on travel in and out of Russia and in and out of the Ukraine. We saw in Poland, there was a depression the first week of the war, and then it's come back to sort of normal trending levels. But yeah, it definitely has been an impact specifically where the events are unfortunately unfolding.
But relatively regional, localized,
yes,
and not so much maybe on the larger numbers in terms of travelers globally feeling unsafe. It's fairly localized.
Seen that yet.
Yeah. How is that for you, Rob? I know that maybe Delta itself is not directly maybe impacted by the closure of the airspace over Russia, but maybe your partners, your SkyTeam partners in Europe, in Asia Pacific are impacted. How does that change things for airlines?
Yes, absolutely. Appreciate the question. It's definitely had an impact on the industry. I'll start, call it U.S. point of sale, leisure traffic, right? We've got spring and summer coming up, a lot of tour operator itineraries, cruise line itineraries, which obviously those companies have had to cancel those or divert. And so a lot of passenger reaccommodations taking place as we speak right now. And so we're working fast and furious with our partners and the direct customers themselves to be able to reaccommodate them. We were seeing strong and steady build to Europe, and we're actually still seeing that for Western Europe. Of course, as you move east into those Eastern Europe bloc countries, consumers are hitting the pause button. And then to your point, it's spot on with our partners as well too. So think Air France, KLM trying to fly from Europe to Asia, whereas before you could fly directly over Russia. Now you're having to divert around Russia. It adds at least a couple, 3 hours to the itinerary, sometimes requires a fuel stop. And so it gets very, very pricey and expensive when you have to make that type of diversion to avoid Russian airspace. And it goes both directions. So, for example, Korean Airlines, our other partner in Asia, same thing, trying to fly from Asia to Europe. They're going through that same dynamic there as well, too. So, so there's definitely adds inefficiencies, it adds costs, it adds stress. And so, so we're keeping obviously very, very close tabs on these trends throughout the past couple of weeks.
Yep. Scott, for you, the fact that we live in a world where things suddenly happen. So as a travel industry, we've been through many bumps in the past, a huge bump, of course, now. What would be your lesson or your recommendation for how can we prepare better for the next decade in terms of knowing that there's so much uncertainty in our world?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, try and remain optimistic. I think the last 2 years, again, have shown us how resilient we can be as a travel industry and community. You know, personally, I think it's really identifying, you know, what those big rocks are, what those priorities are. And although, you know, each of our organizations may have their own, you know, they're similar as well. So I think it's really focusing on how we can, again, focus on creating a memorable, personalized experience. You know, for IHG, it's continuing to focus on how, you know, we can focus on growing our market share, of course, how we can focus on adding new hotels globally and new brands. And so IHG has been on a huge growth mission the last several years, adding new hotels, new brands, and we're going to continue to focus on that. You know, we want to continue to be a top leader in the hospitality industry, and we want to have products and hotels that our customers love. So for us, it's just really focusing on our core values as an organization, you know, including, you know, diversity and sustainability, and the customer, and also on supporting our hotel community and ownership. So really, it's just about how we can continue to evolve and do better at what we do, which is really true hospitality for good. So, yeah.
So even more customer driven, of course, focused on growth and profitability, but also there's other important things where as a company you contribute. Very positive. Rob, do you share that positivity? I know Delta has always been positive about recovery, about, you know, we're going back to better world after this also. Do you share that vision for the industry?
Absolutely, we do, and we've seen the naysayers predict the demise of the travel industry in the past, right? Whether it be recessions back in the 80s, 9/11, other just geopolitical crises, economic crises, and there's always been this negativity with travel won't rebound, it won't come back, or it'll come back, but always at a smaller scale. And so, granted, not to the size and scope of coming out of a pandemic, but we are very, very optimistic and bullish, just due to the one-liner point that Wade mentioned earlier. I mean, people want to connect, and they need to connect personally. We feel like throughout the pandemic, individuals perhaps didn't spend on travel, and they may have bought, a refrigerator, done a home improvement, just put the money under their pillow or in the bank. Now they want to reconnect. They want to reconnect with family. They want to take the long overdue vacation that they haven't taken, and that's just on the leisure space. And flip it to the corporate space of, sales folks like Scott and myself, I connected with my customers, and who's going to have that first mover advantage to hit the road and go see that customer? And is that going to give them a competitive advantage versus the other account that maybe is pinching pennies and they're not going to go see them face to face? So we think there's going to be that competitive pressure just in the corporate space as well too to travel. We think, and we're seeing it already in our numbers, just the whole meeting space, which is enormously going to benefit GDSs, certainly airlines and hotels as well too. There's so much pent-up demand for corporate meetings, whether it be to connect now that offices are open and back up, whether it be training. There's an enormous amount of training that's going to take place. There's sales incentive trips that have been postponed that need to happen. And so all these are just immense tailwinds that we think are going to be very, very positive for the industry moving forward as we come out of the pandemic.
So I'm hearing you about that competitive advantage. Any last recommendation for our audience today when maybe there's companies that are still thinking, are we going back to the way we used to do things, or are we going to try to stay virtual as much as possible? Any recommendation, of course, for travelers, right? We want people to travel, but anything other than maybe that competitive advantage of really meeting in person, what would you say, like, let's go out there again?
Sure. I mean, just to expand on that, that's the best example I can think of offhand is like, who's going to see the customer first, and does that help that respective company close the deal, or perhaps flip a customer that they couldn't have flipped if they would have tried to just do a Zoom or a WebEx experience versus seeing them face to face. And we think consumers are going to be smart in their travel as well too, especially corporate travelers. Just because there is a WebEx or Zoom option, it doesn't mean that they can't hit the road and be even more efficient in their schedule moving forward. So they can still hit the road travel. Perhaps I'm going to go see 2 or 3 customers now than just one and back. So I think corporate travelers are going to be smarter and savvier as they go about doing that, and perhaps their respective finance organizations are going to, and corporate travel managers are going to have that as part of the company travel policy. But that's okay, because they can still go out, go on the road, see their customers, but now they can be even more efficient with being able to participate in internal meetings as well too, via the face-to-face Zoom option, whereas before it was phone calls and it's inefficient and more difficult to conduct those meetings from the road. Whereas now, if you're on the road, you can do both. You can see your customer face-to-face, and you can see your internal constituents just by doing WebEx technology as well too. So we think that's a benefit moving forward as well too, that isn't going to have people feel perhaps as landlocked in the office and feel more comfortable being out on the road.
Yeah, great example. And I think we've all of us who have hit the road again, we've seen it. I landed here in Dallas last night, and I had to take a Zoom meeting on the airport, and I was surrounded by other people who were all in virtual meetings in the place, trying to combine that real travel with still the virtual meetings. Great. Any last thoughts from you, Scott, about the new world?
Yeah, I think you've got kind of 2 thoughts, where you've got the folks that have been not traveling, that haven't been out there, that are still, I think, a bit reluctant. But once they do get out there, they see that the power of getting together and the momentum that it creates. And I think that, Rob touched on it. A lot of our account directors, when they're going out, they're actually making better use of their time, because we're finding that although the corporate travel is not where it needs to be, there is that pent-up demand. And I think that once we get out there, you're seeing more and more interactions, meetings with multiple customers during the week, versus, just doing those one-off trips. So it's forced us to really think more strategically. And I think that'll continue. The leisure is going to continue. I think that we'll continue to see the leisure travel. And the groups and meetings, I mean, there is so much pent-up demand. It's really hard to find meeting space with a lot of these hotels. And I think we're going to start to see more and more of the smaller to mid-sized meetings. I think those larger meetings, of course, will still take place, but it's going to be more regional. Yeah, I think once people get back out there, and I can only speak for myself because, quite honestly, it was a little hard adjusting back on the road last year after being home so well. And it was like, wow, I really enjoyed, being at home and doing the virtual. This was kind of cool. But then I got, you do get tired of it. You need that interaction. And that's where you make the connection. And there's only so much that you can do in terms of building those relationships virtually. I think that coming together, and that's what our industry is about.
Great. I echo that. Thank you so much. Wade.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Scott, for your insights. It was really awesome talking to you. Thanks for sharing that with the world. Thank you for the audience for joining us today. And we look forward to reconnecting again at our next Fireside Chat when we will talk more about sustainability. Have a wonderful day.